Bruschetta is usually a watery, under-seasoned tomato dish that you feel obligated to eat before the food you actually want to eat. And I think that's a huge letdown because this dish has all of the potential to be the star. I'm gonna show you 3 easy bruschetta recipes that anybody can make, and they're gonna forever change the way you think about tomatoes. The first bruschetta recipe here is going to be a play on the classic version we all know. The tomatoes in classic bruschetta are usually so flavorless and watery that no matter what they're paired with, it's going to taste sad. If we can get the tomatoes right, the basil and olive oil can sing along with the sweet acidity of the tomatoes. In our case, that's going to be about 75 grams of good tasting tomatoes per serving. If you want good tasting bruschetta, you've got to pick a tomato that's full of flavor. If it's late summer, get some beautiful heirloom varietals. If it's February, use some nice cherry tomatoes. Trust me when I say this is where most people go wrong. If you pick an out of season Roma tomato, it's going to taste like nothing and the texture is going to be horrid. Chop these into a smaller dice and then place them into a bowl. Now this is important and it probably goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. We're going to season these with salt, pepper, and a really good tasting olive oil. Any juice that comes out of the tomatoes in the seasoning process is going to sit at the bottom and it's going to taste delicious when mixed with the oil, so we'll spoon a little bit over the bread at the end. We could just add some basil, honestly, and call it a day, but to punch up the salt levels, I like to add just the smallest amount of crispy pancetta. This is an amazing way to add depth and salt without turning this into a BLT. Add your diced pancetta to a cold pan with just enough water to barely cover the pieces and set the heat to medium. As this heats up, the fat's going to render and the pancetta is going to have enough time to cook through and crisp up without any of the residue on the bottom burning. This is super important because once the pieces of pork are crispy, you can remove them from the pan and add in 2 slices of a rustic loaf. The bread is going to soak up all that beautiful pork fat and fry up into something really, really special. You could totally toast the bread in the oven if you're making this for a bunch of people, just spread on some of the fat beforehand, but I think fried bread is one of the most delicious things in the world. It's probably not super healthy, but maybe it's balanced by the tomatoes. I don't know. Do what works for you. When your bread is crunchy on both sides, remove it and rub it slightly with a garlic clove. This is enough garlic flavor to give you a little backbone without it tasting like garlic bread. Do one side if you're scared of it tasting too garlicky. To build this bruschetta, I like to slice the bread first and then dress it so the tomatoes stay on top when I put them on the plate. Take your tomatoes and spoon on half the mixture onto each piece of bread. Be sure to spoon on a little bit of that olive oil / tomato sauce so the bread can turn into that perfect texture of crunchy, soggy. I really like that, but you may not be as into it. Place the pancetta on top of the tomatoes and then top it with a few pieces of fresh basil. This last step is important as everything we've put on so far has been salt, fat, and sweet. To balance this, we need some lemon zest. This is just enough to wake up those taste buds before you get all of the umami from the tomatoes and the pancetta. This is the way you need to be building your classic bruschettas. Everything exists to highlight a different flavor within the tomato, and the basil is a classic for a reason. It pairs so beautifully with that tomato flavor. This is really, really delicious. Basically the optimal version of a classic bruschetta. Though what if we took this same structure and concept but transferred it to a totally different cuisine? Think a bruschetta with corn, roasted poblano, and a really nice avocado crema. That sounds really, really good to me, so let me show you how to make it. Start again by dicing 150 grams of good in-season tomato. Hit it with salt, pepper, and olive oil just like before. This doesn't have to be extra virgin olive oil. You don't need it to be as olive oil forward as the classic version. Set this aside for now and let's make a little avocado crema. The creaminess works really well with the brightness of the tomato. Making a flavorful and acidic crema is really, really simple once you know how. Take a small container, about 150 grams of unflavored Greek yogurt, and add it to a blender. To that, add in 1 avocado, 1 jalapeno with the seeds removed if you want it not spicy and the seeds in if you want it spicy, a bunch of cilantro, the juice of half a lime, and a bunch of kosher salt. My actual blender broke, so I had to do this with a stick blender. It's not ideal, but it works out in the end. Sometimes you gotta adapt to what you have. This acidic crema is gonna bring a nice contrast flavor to the sweet, juicy tomatoes, and avocados and tomatoes are a match made in heaven, so it's perfect here. To make this bruschetta smoky and exciting, I like some charred poblano. This isn't really spicy at all, it's more savory. Take a washed poblano and hold it over the flames on your stove, or place it under the broiler until the skin is charred and blackened all over. The skin itself is tough to break down, so we need it gone before eating. Place your charred poblano in a bowl, then cover it with plastic wrap so the insides can steam and the whole pepper can soften. This takes around 10 minutes to cool down enough to handle, so give it some time. Remove the skin from the pepper by scraping it with a paper towel or just the back of your knife, and then cut the top off, remove the seeds, and dice the pepper. Honestly, I prefer these to be pretty small. I don't want a massive hunk of anything on my bruschetta. I think a problem with a lot of bruschettas is the pieces are too big and you kind of pull off everything in one bite. Season this diced pepper with a big pinch of salt, and that's our smoky element taken care of. Toss a little frozen corn into a hot skillet with some oil and salt for a really, really quick corn topping. It's way too easy and adds a little pop of sweetness in every bite. Same as before, we're just gonna fry the bread in the pan till it's crispy and beautiful on both sides. So let's build this bad boy. Slice your bread and lay on the seasoned tomatoes and then dot the poblanos around the tomatoes. You really wanna think about each bite and make sure that there's peppers in each one. Add a few dollops of the crema and then scatter your corn about. Same thing with the poblanos, you want these all over. Top this with cilantro and flaky salt and then you are ready to dig in. In my opinion, this isn't too far away from the classic bruschetta. It has the same brightness, sweetness, and freshness, just with a very different coat of paint. It's super, super delicious and really approachable. Now for a version that I expect to be a little bit divisive because it involves me cooking the tomatoes, which I think is pretty much a no-go for most bruschettas, but trust me, bear with me on this, this is going to blow your mind with the flavors here. We want a spicy component for this, and we're gonna take that in the form of sweet, tangy, softened chilies. Thinly sliced 3 Fresno chilies. This is gonna make enough for a couple batches, so you're gonna have some left over if you only make 1 or 2 bruschettas. And then add them to a pot with a little olive oil and salt. Cook these over medium for a few minutes, basically just until they're softened and the oil begins turning red from the chilies. Now add in 10 grams of rice vinegar and 5 grams of white sugar, then mix it in to dissolve. Turn off the heat and cover this while we work on the next few components. As these sit, the peppers are gonna kind of absorb the vinegar and sugar and turn it into this really sweet, kind of acidic, punchy, hot topping. Now for the tomatoes, because we're gonna be cooking them, we need these to be much larger than before. Something like you see here, a sort of large dice, is gonna be much better here. That way the tomatoes don't turn into nothing and mush as they cook. Tomatoes pair crazy well with ginger. I actually think it's underutilized. This sort of bright citrusy note of the ginger is really, really beautiful. So mince a small knob of ginger here, and then we're just gonna add that into the same container with the tomatoes. In a pot over medium, add a touch of oil and then add in the tomatoes and ginger. To that, add in 5 grams of fish sauce and let this cook for 5 to 10 minutes, basically until they just barely begin to break down. You still want these to be fresh and juicy, just slightly infused from the brightness of the ginger and the salt from the fish sauce. These are really, really delicious and don't taste like cooked tomatoes. They still have all of that juicy kind of bite of a fresh tomato, just with a little bit more extra in it. Remove these from the heat and let them cool while we make this sweet component of this dish. Fried shallots are perfect for this. We're sticking with this kind of Southeast Asian pairing of flavors here. Start by peeling and thinly slicing 2 shallots, and I'm just gonna fry these in the same pan that I'm gonna toast the bread in. Add the smallest layer of oil necessary to get them covered, and then begin heating over medium. If you wanna test these for the correct temp, just barely dip in the end of one of the pieces, and if they begin to sizzle, you're good to add them all in. Let these cook for a few minutes until they just barely begin taking on browning. When shallots have a really nice brown color, they actually taste really burnt, so cook these less than you think. They cook so fast and continue to crisp up as they cool, so take them out before you think they're done. Season these with salt when they come out, and look at that, we're left with a really nice shallot flavored oil in case we want to fry or toast in it. I just poured a little of the oil out so the bread wasn't completely covered in it, and then toasted it on both sides till it was beautiful, crispy, and shallot flavored. For the building process on this one, take your toast and top it with those supercharged tomatoes. Place your chilies on top, as little or as many as you'd like. They can be pretty hot. Add a sprinkle of the fried shallots. Some lime zest is really, really nice here, and then place on some cilantro to really tie the flavors all together. At least I think that's what cilantro would do if I could eat it. All of the cilantro in today's video was parsley. Like I mentioned, this may be a little bit divisive, but I think it's so, so delicious. This tastes like a fancy version you'd see in an upscale restaurant. It's reminiscent of the classic bruschetta in appearance, but the flavors are completely different. Inspired by the kind of classic pantheon of Southeast Asian flavors being fish sauce, shallot, ginger, you get all of that kind of delicious punch with bruschetta and tomatoes as kind of the base to get the flavors into your mouth. It's really, really delicious, and I think absolutely worth trying. Any of these 3 recipes, for that matter, are totally worth your time, so let me know which one you'd try in the comments down below. Massive shout out to the amazing people supporting me directly on Patreon through patreon.com/CameronMarty. They get some cool benefits for supporting the channel, and I get to keep making videos, so check it out and consider becoming a patron. If you're in need of a quick lunch and love spicy noodles, check out this pulled duck ramen recipe. It's very, very easy to make, and it's really, really tasty. If you enjoy this type of cooking content, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to let YouTube know that you want to see more of it. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers.